major impact on the right to vote in Alabama. In a 5-4 decision, the justices are allowing a redistricting map drawn by state Republicans to stay in place, even though a lower court ruled that it likely violated the Voting Rights Act. Here to discuss now, former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams and CNN's chief legal analyst, Mr. Jeffrey Toobin. Good to see you both, gentlemen. Elliot, I'm going to start with you. What does this really mean for black voters in Alabama? Because the Republican map includes only one district where black voters can elect a candidate of their choice.
Look, Don, these questions of discrimination are sometimes hard to pin down, hard to prove because they're nebulous. What is discrimination? But just look at the numbers, right? Blacks make up about 27% of Alabama's population, but only 14% of the congressional districts. About a third of blacks in Alabama live in a majority black district. 92% of whites do. Now, you can say that somehow these were drawn, and it just so happened to be the case that the numbers were so skewed. But the simple fact is, when you look at the data, it is abundantly clear that the votes of blacks in Alabama have been diluted. And the law, as it is written now, very clearly allows consideration of race, not above all other factors, but at least consideration of it, to ensure that voters have the ability to vote for the leaders of their choosing. And that's just not the case in Alabama right now.
Jeffrey, Justice Elena Kagan wrote in her dissent that by allowing this map, that the court does a disservice to black Alabamians who, under that precedent, have had their electoral power diminished in violation of a law this court once knew to buttress all of American democracy. Is this another blow to the 1965 Voting Rights Act? What's your take, Jeffrey?
Yeah, the Voting Rights Act is, it is the most important civil rights law ever passed in the United States. And, before 1965, African Americans, particularly in the South, effectively were unrepresented in Congress, in the state houses, in governorships. And this was really changed by the Voting Rights Act. Over the past 10 years, the Voting Rights Act has become increasingly a dead letter. That basically what the Supreme Court is doing is saying to these Republican-dominated states, look, you can do whatever you want to make sure that Republicans stay in charge, and that African Americans have less representatives in the House of Representatives, in the state houses, than they would, as Elliot pointed out, based on their percentages of the population. What I think is really striking about today's decision, or last night's decision, is that Chief Justice John Roberts, who was the leader of the fight to limit the scope of the Voting Rights Act, even he was appalled and had to dissent by what was done by the 5 more conservative justices on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is changing before our eyes, and even John Roberts, a serious conservative, is saying, look, things are getting really out of control here.
Yeah. Jeffrey, you wrote the book called The Nine about the Supreme Court. So I've been wanting to ask you, as we had this whole controversy regarding, black women. Last week when we were talking about GOP uproar over black female justice, we were talking about what some black politicos were doing. Some white conservative politicos were saying about it, calling it affirmative action, all that. Also, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana made remarks about wanting a justice that knows the Constitution from a J. Crew catalog. His office has said to CNN that he's used that language before in regards to judges of the courts. But regardless, he also said, he spoke about being woke, right, in regards to the possibility of a black woman. What is going on with all of these Republicans who are making this about race or about affirmative action? What is this issue? What do you think is going on here?
Well, I think in fairness to Senator Kennedy, it is true that he has often said in his folksy way, look, we want people who know the law, not just politicos of one kind or another. That's true. But I think what's going on in a more broad way in the Republican Party is they are using the president's promise to put the first black woman on the Supreme Court as an excuse to rile up people who are angry about affirmative action, who are angry about African Americans having power that they have been denied for the entirety of American history. So there is no doubt that Republicans generally are trying to turn this into a forum for white resentment, even if what Senator Kennedy said was, pretty common and fair for what he said in the past.
Yeah, but Elliot, why would you think that a black woman would be woke?
Well, yeah, I mean, just this is such an exhausting debate to have. Let's look at the credentials done of Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of the people on the short list, who went to Harvard University twice, graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University, was a federal judge for 9 years, both in private practice and in government. I don't think there's actually a sitting Supreme Court justice right now who has those credentials. And so the whole idea of this nominee being an affirmative action pick, regardless of what the president said, this is like getting back to my answer from before, just look at the data, look at the numbers, look at these people's resumes, and they are literally flawless. You cannot find lawyers in America with cleaner resumes. So yes, maybe, it is a powerful talking point from certain political sectors here, but just look at these people's resumes, and that should end the debate.
Well stated.
And let's just talk a little bit about diversity. We always talk about diversity in terms of race and gender. Judge Jackson was a criminal defense lawyer. We have not had criminal defense lawyers on the Supreme Court for a long time, people who have devoted serious chunks of their life to it. And that's diversity that the court needs, especially when you consider how many criminal cases they take. Yes, racial diversity is important. Yes, gender diversity is important, but also diversity of experience within the law.
So you're saying to me that these women would know a law book from the J. Crew catalog? Is that
I am saying that with great confidence, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, gentlemen.